I want you to know that this event took quite some planning, and we really appreciate you being here today, learning a bit more about other people's faiths and other people's practices. And we'd like to specifically thank our speakers here today who agreed to come and share some of that knowledge with us. And hopefully you'll find the seminars, the lectures today informative, or at the very least opening your minds and eyes to see that there's other ways to go about finance. And without any further ado, I'd like to begin today's program by introducing the first speaker for today. We have Brother Rehan Huda here with us today, all the way from Toronto. Brother Rehan has extensive knowledge and experience in this particular field of finance, and more specifically in the field of Islamic finance. And he is here today to share his knowledge and understanding of this topic of Islamic finance. And this will be structured in a way where even a beginner, someone that does not have any prior knowledge to Islamic finance, will be able to grasp and understand. So please welcome Brother Rehan Huda.
Can everybody hear me? Yes. Wonderful, that's great. Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala ashrafil mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh, for the introduction. Assalamu alaikum, everybody.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
And thank you for coming. I'm actually surprised on a Saturday morning this many people will show up for Islamic finance lecture. I teach this course. It's a second year MBA course at the University of Toronto. And I don't even get my students showing up as much as this. So I want to commend you for coming here this morning. And what I like to do is, and usually when I do my intro class, in Islamic finance, and these are like second year MBA students at the Rotman School of Business in Toronto, and they're just intrigued by Islamic finance. And usually what I do is I start off my class with the first intro class, and I'm so surprised. It's been running for about 6 years, and alhamdulillah, it's been the top ranked MBA class for the last 6 years. And most of the students are from a variety of backgrounds. You have a handful of Muslim students there, but I have a lot of Chinese students there, Christian, Jewish students, so from all over different faiths. And I'd ask them, why are you interested in Islamic finance? And I look at some guy and I'd say, what's a white guy like you doing in a class like this? And so, and I'd get very interesting reactions. And one of the fundamental things that seems to run across all of these students is the feeling that there's something fundamentally and structurally wrong with the current system, the economic financial system. Whether it's income inequality that we're seeing right across the world, where you have fewer and fewer people controlling most of the wealth in the world. Despite all this economic progress, we're seeing still so much poverty, and we can't believe this year we're seeing millions, maybe tens of millions of people maybe starving to death or coming close to it. And meanwhile, you have this incredible wealth and luxury at the other end. So there's something fundamentally wrong, and that's a premise which I think a lot of people will agree with. Some of the top economists in the world, policymakers, governments, and just not knowing what to do or how to tackle it. And so that's something which a lot of my students seem to agree with. Secondly, it doesn't seem like anyone has a solution to this that's been at least publicly communicated in. And we're trying all sorts of ways to fix the systems, whether it's a more socialist system or more open market, free market system. But there's no real solution that has been offered, and people are just struggling with all sorts of ideas. And that's so. Maybe here some of these students thought that Islamic finance may have some, interesting options. It's interesting that the former governor of the Bank of Canada, Mark Carney, was the governor at the Bank of England, and I used to work with him when he was at the Department of Finance in Ottawa. And so his last lectures before he left Canada were all about ethics. I mean, this was right after the financial crisis in the U.S., 2007, 2008. And he was talking about there is this lack of ethics and morals in the financial system. We need to get that back. And so, there is obviously something wrong here. And we've even seen it here in Canada, just very recently when you had Bombardier been given hundreds of millions of dollars by us, the taxpayers, and then suddenly you're seeing these huge bonuses from their executives, and now there's protests in the streets, and the CEO now is saying, okay, we're really not going to take it. So this sort of culture of corporate greed and that permeates across our systems, and we need to do something about it. But what do we do, and how do we do it? And so my lecture today will be an introduction to Islamic finance, key principles, and I'll try not to make it too detailed on structuring murabaha and musharaka contracts and that because those I don't think anyone would be really interested in. But what's more important, I found, are the general principles about it. And then from there, once you understand the general principles, and then one can start understanding why we have certain prohibitions in Islam, why certain things are allowed and prohibited. And so, before I start, how many people have taken a course or read a book or anything on Islamic finance before? Just for raise your hands. Okay, a few people have done it. Okay, excellent. So now I'm going to test you. So, brother, what would you say would be characteristics of, let's say, Islamic finance? Give me something which Islam has that's related to finance. Yeah.
Historically or right now?
Historically. Yeah.
Oh, historically. Well, obviously there is a halal and haram factor. So the Islamic finance means also has to do with letting you invest money in halal sources as opposed to haram sources, such as gambling or riba itself, or alcohol, whatever. So that's one area, I guess.
Yeah.
The other one is earning your money, whether it's halal or haram. So the sources of that, and there is obviously the money itself, which I am personally have been concerned with for the past couple of years, and that is creation of money and the currency itself. And I think very, very few people are actually talking at all about this. I know in Europe some people are talking about it, and almost all of them are non-Muslims, unfortunately. It's supposed to be us who should be talking about it, but we're not. So that's one of the areas that I also wanted to ask your opinion on, as to, as Muslims in general and people who are in finance, are we aware of this, or because it is very dry, very complex, and anyone who tries to understand it obviously, backs out because of the complexities. But at the same time, it is extremely important, because I have read fatwas that technically the money we're using right now is haram. Period. Now, like the Imam said in the Friday khutbah, he doesn't want people who have mortgages on interest to sell the house tomorrow and bring their families on the street. I'm not asking that we should stop going to Tim Hortons now because we don't have halal money, but we should at least think about it and talk about it. And I think we have a certain obligation to kind of do whatever we can in our capacity, at least what some non-Muslims are doing.
And that's a good point. On the first point, in terms of investing, and definitely, if you look at Islamic finance and Islamic investing, we'll speak about it now a little bit later in the program as well. But there's a movement towards socially responsible investing. Generally, that's happening globally, and those funds are becoming larger and larger. In fact, one of the most successful socially responsible funds is actually an Islamic fund out of the U.S. called Amana, mutual funds of Bellingham, Washington. It's a cool spot here. So they've done billions and billions in assets and that. And so you have a lot more people concerned about it. And what Islamic finance does is not only has those socially responsible filters, but also filters that even the socially responsible funds don't have. For example, the large banks are not in our portfolio, etc. And plus we have financial stuff. Companies are not too heavily leveraged. So they become part of our socially responsible set of funds. And so we actually have a more stricter criteria for what we believe is socially responsible in that. So that's an important part. And about the money thing, that's a very complicated topic. We'll probably need a whole seminar in itself to discuss, but certainly there's something structurally wrong with the whole financial system, and definitely part of the banking system, monetary system is part of it, and that. So that's very good points, Afif. Sister, Red. So what do you know about Islamic finance?
I know very little. I've read some articles and Googled things, and it's practiced at home. But I know the principle is that there has to be a product or a service exchange between the lender and the borrower. That's number one. Secondly, the lender and the borrower must share risks and loss and profit. So that way we don't have a lot of people who lose their homes or their cars or whatever they borrow the finances for. So there is kind of sharing of responsibility, which makes it a bit of an equal system. That's the bit that I know.
No, that's an excellent, and as we get into the principles, that's actually an excellent point. And this was sort of an issue that was sort of discussed in policy circles, after the 2007-2008 crisis in the United States. And so, if you look at that system, and they actually interviewed a lawyer who was representing, an Islamic bank in the U.S. Actually, it's Islamic window in a bank. It's a bank owned by a Jewish family, an Iman Bank in Chicago, and they have Islamic products and services. It's interesting, the U.S. actually have one bank owned by a Jewish family. You have another bank in Michigan that's owned by a Catholic family. And then you have another bank that's out in California that's owned by a Muslim group. And most people think that's the least Sharia compliant of them all. And then the Jewish group is actually more Sharia compliant because they're just more careful, So they had one of their lawyers of this Diwan Bank being interviewed in the subprime crisis, and he said, "How has this crisis affected your Muslim clients?" And he said, "It hasn't affected us at all, because we would never lend like that. That's not our policy. I mean, and if you saw that subprime, how cynical the whole system was, from the banks to the insurance companies to the mortgage brokers and agents to everybody in the system. They were pushing all of these people who were poor, who couldn't afford houses, giving them money for the house, giving them money for furniture. They couldn't afford furniture, right? So they had what they call these ninja mortgages, no income, no job or assets, and so they would give them the money. And they would start off with these very low interest rates, and so everyone could afford it. And so then after that, they knew in the future the interest rates would go up. They would not be able to afford it, but they didn't care. They were making money now, and this was going all across the United States. Hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars. Then when it collapsed, what happened? Who made the money? And who lost the money? When it collapsed, as the sister was talking about, risk sharing. People were thrown out of their homes. All the poor, all their savings, everything they had, back to nothing. And then you had these investment banks who were betting against it. So, and then you had these vulture funds who were buying out all these homes for free almost. And now they've gone back to their old value. So they got them for next to nothing, and they made a lot of money. The poor lost out. And who did the government bail out? The banks. The TARP program. It bailed out the big banks. They got the money. And what did? They did the same thing as Bombardier did. Gave all their executives huge bonuses. What's their other? And what does the poor, the guy who could barely make afford rent before, and suddenly put in a house for a few years, is back on the street, bankrupt and everything. And then the taxes he pays was used to rescue the banks. Is that a just system? And some of the people were criticizing the whole system and saying, how could it be, that it's these poor people who actually pay for the cost of this crisis? And then you have the banks in it. So the reason why I bring this up and sort of like prelude to discussing Islamic finance is that it is fundamentally about a just economic order. If you look at what the principles of Islamic finance are, it's interesting, the Vatican had a communique a few years back where the Pope had, at that time it said, listen, those principles of Islamic finance, those are our principles too. Those are principles we share. These are principles shared in all monotheistic religions. In fact, they're shared in most cultures, the values, the principles. It's just that in the last few decades, especially, all this financial innovation, all of this